The dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that pierced through the small attic window, casting eerie shadows across the cluttered space above Grandma Rose's house in Silver Lake. 8-year-old Tommy Ashford sneezed as he carefully navigated between towers of cardboard boxes and moth-eaten furniture, searching for his baseball glove that his grandmother swore she'd seen up there. The Los Angeles heat of late summer 2023 made the attic feel like an oven, and sweat beaded on Tommy's forehead as he pushed aside old Christmas decorations and yellowed newspapers from decades past. His grandmother's voice drifted up from below, calling him for lunch, but something caught his eye that made him forget all about food. Wedged between a cracked mirror and a stack of leather-bound photo albums was a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by age. Tommy's curiosity got the better of him as he carefully extracted the box from its hiding place. The hinges creaked ominously as he opened it, revealing a collection of black and white photographs held together with a faded red ribbon. The first few photos showed his grandmother as a young woman, smiling alongside his grandfather in front of their old house downtown. But it was the photograph at the bottom of the stack that made Tommy's breath catch in his throat. The image was slightly blurred, as if the photographer's hand had trembled when taking the shot, but the scene was clear enough to make out. A young boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, knelt on the grass in what appeared to be Griffith Park. He was playing with a small wind-up horse, its metal surface gleaming in the afternoon sun of what Tommy could only assume was decades ago. The child's face was turned slightly away from the camera, but there was something about his posture that seemed familiar, almost like looking at an old version of himself. But what made Tommy's skin crawl was the shadow behind the boy. At first glance, it appeared to be just another shadow cast by the oak trees that surrounded the area, but as Tommy held the photograph closer to the light, he could make out the distinct outline of another child standing directly behind the boy with the horse. The figure was translucent, barely visible, as if the camera had somehow captured something that shouldn't have been there. Tommy's hands began to shake as he turned the photograph over. In his grandmother's familiar handwriting, faded blue ink spelled out, "Little Robert playing with Michael's horse, Griffith Park, September 1939. Poor Michael disappeared that same day. Never found." The temperature in the attic seemed to drop several degrees, and Tommy felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He stared at the ghostly figure in the photograph, trying to convince himself it was just a trick of light and shadow. But the more he looked, the more defined the second child became. He could almost make out facial features, a sad expression, and what appeared to be the boy reaching out toward his brother. "Tommy, lunch is getting cold," his grandmother's voice called again, more insistent this time. Tommy carefully placed the photograph back in the box, but as he did, he could have sworn he heard the faint, tinkling melody of a music box coming from somewhere in the dusty attic. The sound lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to send a chill down his spine. He quickly grabbed the wooden box and made his way down the creaky attic ladder, his mind racing with questions about the mysterious photograph and the boy who had vanished without a trace. As he descended into the familiar warmth of his grandmother's house, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him down from the attic, something that had been waiting in that photograph for over 80 years. Tommy found his grandmother Rose in the kitchen, her weathered hands busy preparing his favorite grilled cheese sandwich. At 78, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate the world despite failing eyesight, but her mind remained sharp as ever. The familiar scent of butter sizzling in the cast-iron pan should have been comforting, but Tommy's discovery in the attic had left him feeling unsettled. "Grandma," Tommy began hesitantly, placing the wooden box on the kitchen table. "I found this upstairs while looking for my glove." Rose turned slowly, and Tommy noticed how her face paled when she saw the box. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the dish towel hanging by the stove, and for a moment she seemed much older than her years. "Where exactly did you find that, honey?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was wedged behind some old photo albums. "Grandma, there's a picture in here from 1939, and you wrote something about someone named Michael disappearing." Tommy opened the box and carefully extracted the photograph. Who was he? Rose's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into the nearest chair, her eyes fixed on the image Tommy held. She removed her glasses, cleaned them nervously, and put them back on as if hoping the photograph might somehow look different. "Michael was my little brother," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "He was only 5 years old when he vanished. That boy in the picture playing with the horse That's our brother Robert. He was 7 at the time. Tommy studied his grandmother's face, noting the deep lines that seemed to have appeared suddenly around her eyes. What happened to Michael? How did he just disappear? Rose was quiet for so long that Tommy wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her words came out in a rush as if she'd been holding them back for decades. It was a Sunday afternoon in September. Our parents took us to Griffith Park for a picnic. Michael had this little wind-up horse that he carried everywhere. It played the most beautiful melody when you turned the key. She paused, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the photograph. Robert was playing with it while Michael wandered off to pick wildflowers. When we called for lunch, Michael didn't come back. But surely someone found him. The police must have searched everywhere. They did search, Tommy, for weeks. Hundreds of volunteers combed every inch of that park. They brought in bloodhounds. They dragged the ponds, they searched caves and abandoned buildings. But it was like Michael had simply vanished into thin air. Rose's voice broke slightly. The strangest thing was that wind-up horse. We found it the next day, sitting perfectly in the exact spot where Robert had been playing, as if someone had carefully placed it there. Tommy felt a chill run down his spine. Grandma, look at the photograph more carefully. Behind Robert, there's something there. It looks like another person. Rose took the photograph with shaking hands and held it close to her face. As she studied the image, her breathing became shallow and rapid. "Dear God," she whispered. "I've looked at this picture 1,000 times over the years, but I never noticed. You see it too? It's Michael. That's Michael standing behind Robert." Tears began to stream down her grandmother's face. "But how is that possible? This picture was taken after he disappeared. I remember Robert playing alone with that horse while we were searching for his brother." The kitchen suddenly felt oppressively warm, despite the air conditioning humming in the background. Tommy noticed that the shadows seemed deeper, and there was an odd quality to the light filtering through the lace curtains. Somewhere in the distance, barely audible, came the faint sound of a melody, the same tinkling tune he'd heard in the attic. "Grandma, do you hear that music?" Rose's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "That's impossible. That's Michael's song. That's the melody his little horse played." She gripped Tommy's arm with surprising strength. "Tommy, I think Michael has been trying to come home all these years, and somehow that photograph is the key." That night, Tommy lay in the guest bedroom of his grandmother's house, staring at the ceiling as the old house settled around him with its familiar creaks and sighs. His parents had dropped him off for his weekly sleepover, a tradition that had started when he was 5 and showed no signs of ending despite his approaching 9th birthday. Usually he loved these nights at Grandma Rose's house, but tonight felt different. The photograph lay on the nightstand beside his bed, and even in the darkness, Tommy could feel its presence like a weight in the room. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ghostly figure of Michael standing behind his brother Robert, that translucent outline that shouldn't have been captured on film, but somehow was. The digital clock on the nightstand read 11:47 p.m. when Tommy first heard it, a soft, metallic tinkling that seemed to come from somewhere inside the walls themselves. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a simple tune that repeated over and over like a lullaby. Tommy sat up in bed, his heart pounding as he recognized the song his grandmother had described. The music grew louder, more distinct, and Tommy realized it was coming from downstairs. Against every instinct telling him to stay in bed and pull the covers over his head, he quietly opened his bedroom door and crept into the hallway. The old hardwood floors were cold against his bare feet, and each step seemed to echo, despite his attempts to move silently. At the top of the staircase, Tommy paused. The music was definitely coming from the living room, and there was something else, a soft scraping sound, like metal against wood. He gripped the banister and slowly descended, avoiding the steps he knew would creak from years of experience navigating this house. The living room was bathed in pale moonlight that filtered through the sheer curtains, casting everything in shades of silver and grey. Tommy's breath caught in his throat when he saw it sitting in the center of the coffee table, a small, antique wind-up horse made of painted tin. The little toy was moving in a slow circle, its tiny legs lifting and falling in a mechanical gallop, while the haunting melody played from somewhere within its metal body. Tommy approached the table cautiously, his bare feet silent on the Persian rug his grandmother had inherited from her own mother. The horse was beautiful, in an old-fashioned way, with intricate details painted in faded blues and golds. Its mane was carved with delicate precision, and its eyes seemed almost alive in the moonlight. As he reached out to touch it, the horse suddenly stopped moving. The melody cut off mid-note, leaving the room in an oppressive silence that felt heavier than the music had been. Tommy's hand hovered inches from the toy, and in that moment he could have sworn he saw a small figure reflected in the horse's glossy surface, the same ghostly outline from the photograph. "Michael," Tommy whispered, the name barely audible in the quiet room. The temperature in the living room dropped so suddenly that Tommy's breath became visible in small puffs of vapor. The curtains began to flutter despite the fact that all the windows were closed, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen and shift. Tommy felt a presence behind him, not threatening but desperately sad, like someone who had been waiting for a very long time. He turned around slowly, and there, standing by the window, was the translucent figure of a small boy. The child looked to be about 5 years old, with dark hair and clothes that seemed to belong to another era. His face was pale and drawn, but his eyes were fixed on Tommy with an intensity that made the older boy's skin prickle with goosebumps. "You can see me," the ghostly child said, his voice sounding like it was coming from very far away. "Finally, someone can see me." Tommy's legs felt weak, but he managed to stay standing. "Are you Michael, Rose's brother?" The little ghost nodded, and a single tear seemed to shimmer down his translucent cheek. "I've been trying to come home for so long, but I'm lost, Tommy. I'm lost, and I can't find my way back to my family. That horse, it's mine. It's the only thing that connects me to the world of the living." Tommy's mouth felt dry as sandpaper as he stared at the ghostly figure of Michael. The little boy's spirit flickered like a candle flame in the moonlit living room, sometimes solid enough to see clearly, other times nearly transparent. The wind-up horse remained motionless on the coffee table, as if waiting for something. "How long have you been here?" Tommy managed to whisper, his voice cracking with fear and curiosity. Michael moved closer, his bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. "I don't know exactly. Time feels different when you're like this. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like forever." The ghost child's eyes were filled with a sadness that no 5-year-old should ever have to carry. "I remember that day in the park. I was picking flowers for Mama when I heard something calling my name from deeper in the woods." Tommy settled onto the edge of the couch, trying to process what he was seeing and hearing. "What was calling you?" "At first I thought it was Robert or Rose playing a game. The voice sounded friendly, like someone who wanted to show me something wonderful." Michael's form shimmered as he spoke, becoming more solid when he focused on his memories. "I followed the voice deeper into the trees, past the picnic areas and playgrounds, to a part of the park where the shadows were thick even in the afternoon sun." The room grew colder as Michael continued his story, and Tommy pulled his knees up to his chest for warmth. Outside, the wind had picked up, causing the tree branches to scrape against the windows with an unsettling rhythm. There was a man there, or at least something that looked like a man. He was tall and thin, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that seemed to blend with the shadows between the trees. His face— Michael paused, his ghostly form flickering more rapidly. I couldn't really see his face clearly. It kept changing, shifting like smoke. But his voice was so kind, so gentle. He told me he had other children to play with, children who had been waiting for a friend like me. Tommy felt his stomach clench with dread. What happened then? He showed me a clearing I'd never seen before, even though I thought I knew every inch of Griffith Park. There were other children there, maybe a dozen of them, all playing in a circle. They looked happy, laughing and running around. But when I got closer, Michael's voice became barely audible. When I got closer, I realized they weren't really playing. They were trapped, moving in the same patterns over and over again, like my wind-up horse. Their eyes were empty, Tommy, empty like broken dolls. The wind-up horse on the coffee table suddenly began to move again, turning in its mechanical circle, while the haunting melody filled the room. Tommy noticed that Michael's ghostly form became more solid as the music played, as if the toy was somehow anchoring him to the physical world. To the shadow man, he tried to make me join them. He said I would never be lonely again, never have to worry about growing up or getting hurt. But something inside me fought back. Maybe it was thinking about Rose and Robert and how worried they'd be. I ran, Tommy. I ran as fast as I could back toward where I'd left my family. But you never made it back, Tommy said softly. Michael shook his head, tears that looked like drops of moonlight falling from his translucent cheeks. I got lost in those woods. The trees kept shifting and changing. Paths appeared and disappeared. I called for help until my voice gave out, but no one could hear me. And then I realized I wasn't just lost in the woods. I was lost between worlds, not quite alive, but not quite dead either. Tommy reached toward the wind-up horse, and as his fingers touched the cold metal, he felt a jolt of energy that made his entire body tingle. Suddenly, images flashed through his mind. brief glimpses of children playing in a dark clearing, a tall figure that seemed to be made of living shadow, and the terrified face of 5-year-old Michael running through trees that twisted and writhed like living things. "He's still there, Tommy," Michael whispered urgently. "The shadow man is still in those woods, still collecting children, and I think he knows that someone can finally see me. I think he's coming." Tommy barely slept for the remainder of the night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Michael's ghostly face and heard the echo of the shadow man's story. When dawn finally broke over Silver Lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Tommy found himself sitting at his grandmother's kitchen table with her laptop open in front of him, determined to find answers. Grandma Rose had been awake since 5:30, as was her habit, and she'd already brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The irony of that thought wasn't lost on Tommy as he sipped the hot chocolate she'd prepared for him while she settled into the chair across from him with her own steaming mug. "Did you sleep at all, honey?" she asked, studying his pale face and the dark circles under his eyes. "Not really," Tommy admitted. He'd told her about his encounter with Michael's ghost, and while she'd initially been skeptical, the appearance of the wind-up horse in the living room had convinced her that something supernatural was definitely happening in her house. The toy now sat between them on the table, silent and still in the morning light. "I've been thinking about what Michael told you," Rose said quietly, "about other children being taken by this shadow man. Tommy, I want you to look something up for me." Tommy's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "What am I looking for?" "Search for missing children in Griffith Park between 1935 and 1940. If Michael is telling the truth, there should be records of other disappearances around that time." Tommy typed the search terms into Google, and within seconds the screen filled with results that made his blood run cold. Article after article from old Los Angeles newspapers detailed the disappearances of children in and around Griffith Park during those 5 years. The headlines were stark and terrifying. "Third child vanishes near Park Observatory. Family devastated as son disappears during picnic. Police baffled by string of missing children cases." "Grandma, look at this," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. He clicked on a digitized newspaper article from the Los Angeles Times, dated October 15, 1938. The headline read, "11 children now missing from Griffith Park area. Police form special task force." Rose leaned closer to read over his shoulder, her breathing becoming rapid as she scanned the article. "Dear Lord, 11 children in just 3 years. How did I never know about this?" Tommy continued scrolling through the search results, finding more and more evidence of the disappearances. "It looks like the police tried to keep it quiet to prevent panic, but listen to this witness account from 1939. He clicked on another article and began reading aloud. "Mrs. Eleanor Patterson of Los Feliz reported seeing her 7-year-old son, Timothy, talking to a tall, thin man in dark clothing near the park's eastern trail. When she called to her son, both the boy and the mysterious man seemed to vanish into the tree line. Timothy Patterson has not been seen since." The wind-up horse suddenly began to move, its tiny legs lifting in that mechanical gallop, while the familiar melody filled the kitchen. Both Tommy and his grandmother watched in fascination and horror as the toy seemed to respond to their research. "There's more," Tommy said, clicking on a link that led to a historical society website. "Look at this timeline someone put together. Between 1935 and 1940, 15 children disappeared from Griffith Park. The disappearances stopped completely in 1941, but then—" His voice trailed off as he read further down the page. "What is it, Tommy?" "The disappearances started again in 1962, then again in 1984, and—" Tommy's hands began to shake as he scrolled to the bottom of the timeline. "Grandma, 3 children have gone missing from Griffith Park just this year. The most recent was last month." Rose gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "It's happening in cycles. Every 20 to 25 years this thing comes back." Tommy's mind raced as he processed the information. If the pattern held true, that meant the Shadow Man was active right now in 2023. Michael's warning about the entity knowing someone could see him took on a new, terrifying significance. "We have to help Michael," Tommy said suddenly. "And we have to stop this Shadow Man before he takes any more children. But first I need to understand what we're really dealing with." He started a new search, typing in terms like shadow entities, child abduction folklore, and supernatural predators. What he found in the depths of internet forums and paranormal research sites made his stomach turn with dread. Hours passed as Tommy dove deeper into his research, following link after link down rabbit holes of paranormal investigations and historical accounts. What he discovered made the hair on his arms stand on end. Buried in academic papers about California folklore and archived reports from paranormal investigators, he found references to an entity that matched Michael's description perfectly. "Grandma, listen to this," Tommy said, reading from a 1960s academic paper about Native American legends in the Los Angeles area. The Tongva people, who originally lived in this region, have stories about a spirit they called the Hungry Shadow. According to their oral traditions, this entity feeds on the life force of children, particularly those who wander away from their families in sacred places. Rose set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "Sacred places? You mean like Griffith Park?" "That's just it. Before Griffith Park existed, that whole area was considered sacred land by the Tongva. They believed certain groves of oak trees were doorways between worlds, places where spirits could cross over." Tommy clicked on another document, this one from a 1920s anthropological study. "Look at this drawing." The image on the screen showed a tall, thin figure shrouded in shadows, standing among oak trees with children arranged in a circle around him. The figure's face was blank, featureless, just as Michael had described. The researcher who documented this legend wrote that the Tongva would never let their children play alone near these oak groves, especially during certain times of year when the spirit world was thought to be closest to our own. The wind-up horse on the table began moving again, as if responding to Tommy's discoveries. Its melody seemed sadder now, more urgent. "But there's more," Tommy continued, his excitement mixing with growing dread. "I found police reports from other cities. San Francisco, 1901, Portland, 1923, Denver, 1948. All the same pattern, children disappearing near wooded areas, witnesses describing a tall man in dark clothing who seemed to blend with the shadows. Always in cycles, always stopping for years before starting again." Rose stood up and walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the peaceful suburban street. "So this thing isn't just local to Los Angeles. It's been moving around the country for over a century, maybe longer. I found references in European folklore too, dating back to the 1700s. Stories about Der Schattenmann in Germany, L'Homme d'Ombre in France. Always the same description, always targeting children." Tommy's voice grew more urgent as pieces of the puzzle began clicking together. "But here's what's really scary, Grandma. According to these paranormal investigators, the entity doesn't just take children. It uses them. Uses them how?" Tommy hesitated, not sure his grandmother was ready for what he'd discovered. "The children become part of it somehow. Their life force feeds the entity, keeps it strong. But they're not really dead, they're trapped in a kind of limbo, forced to help it hunt for more victims. That clearing Michael described, with all those children playing in circles, they're bait." The room suddenly felt much colder, and both Tommy and Rose noticed that the shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they should be, even with the morning sun streaming through the windows. The wind-up horse spun faster, its melody becoming more frantic. "Tommy," Rose whispered, pointing toward the living room doorway. "Do you see that?" At the edge of the doorway, barely visible in the morning light, stood the translucent figure of Michael. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, Tommy could make out the ghostly outlines of other children. A girl with pigtails who couldn't have been more than 6, a boy in knickers who looked like he belonged in the 1940s, a teenager in bell-bottom jeans from the 1970s. "He knows." Michael's voice seemed to come from very far away, filled with terror. "The Shadow Man knows you can see us. He's angry, Tommy. He's coming for you, and he's bringing all of us with him. We don't want to help him, but we can't resist. We're trapped." The other ghostly children began to move forward, their empty eyes fixed on Tommy. Their movements were jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. Tommy realized with growing horror that these were the missing children from Griffith Park, spanning decades of disappearances. "Run, Tommy," Michael pleaded, his form flickering more rapidly now. "Get away from here before he arrives. But remember, the only way to stop him is to break the connection. You have to destroy what anchors him to this place." "What anchors him?" Tommy shouted, but Michael's form was already fading as the shadow children advanced. "The oak grove." Michael's voice was barely audible now. "The original oak grove where it all began." The temperature in the kitchen plummeted so suddenly that Tommy could see his breath forming white clouds in the air. The shadow children moved closer, their ghostly forms becoming more solid with each step. Tommy grabbed his grandmother's hand and pulled her toward the back door, but as they reached for the handle, they found it wouldn't turn. The door was locked from the inside, but the deadbolt was moving on its own, sliding back and forth with a metallic scraping sound. "The windows," Rose gasped, pointing toward the kitchen window above the sink. But as they looked, frost began spreading across the glass in intricate patterns, sealing them inside. The shadow children had formed a semicircle around them, their empty eyes reflecting an otherworldly light that seemed to come from within their translucent forms. The little girl with pigtails stepped forward first. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind whistling through dry leaves. "He's almost here. The hungry shadow grows stronger every time someone learns the truth. Your knowledge feeds him, Tommy Ashford." The boy in knickers nodded, his movements still jerky and unnatural. "We tried to warn the others over the years. The investigators, the police, the families who came looking for us, but they couldn't see us like you can. They couldn't hear our warnings." Tommy felt his grandmother's hand squeeze his tighter as more shadow children materialized in the kitchen. Some wore clothes from the 1930s, others from the 1960s, 1980s, even modern clothing from recent years. The most recent addition was a girl who couldn't have been more than 7, wearing a frozen t-shirt and light-up sneakers. "How many of you are there?" Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Dozens," the teenager in bell-bottoms replied, "from all over the country, spanning more than a century. Every time he moves to a new hunting ground, he brings us with him. We're his collection, his trophies, and now he wants to add you to it." The wind-up horse on the kitchen table began spinning so fast it became a blur, its melody playing at triple speed and creating a discordant, almost manic sound. The kitchen lights flickered on and off, casting dancing shadows on the walls that seemed to move independently of their sources. Michael's form appeared more solid than the others, and Tommy realized it was because of the wind-up horse. The toy was somehow anchoring his great-great-uncle to this world more firmly than the other trapped children. "Tommy, there's something else you need to know," Michael said urgently. "The Shadow Man doesn't just feed on children's life force. He feeds on fear, on desperation, on the pain of families who never find their lost loved ones. Every anniversary of our disappearances, he grows stronger. Every tear our families shed, every sleepless night they spend wondering what happened to us, it all makes him more powerful." The shadow children began moving closer again, but Tommy noticed something different about their approach. They weren't attacking, they were trying to shield him and his grandmother from something else. Their ghostly forms pressed together, creating a barrier between the living and whatever was approaching from outside. "He's here," the girl in the frozen shirt whispered, her child's voice filled with ancient terror. "The hungry shadow has found you." Through the frost-covered kitchen window, Tommy saw a darkness moving between the trees in his grandmother's backyard. It wasn't the normal darkness of shadow. This was something actively black, like a hole cut in reality itself. As it moved closer to the house, the very air seemed to thicken and become oppressive. "Listen carefully," Michael said, his form flickering as the entity outside grew closer. "The oak grove he's anchored to is in the oldest part of Griffith Park, near where the observatory stands now. But it's not in our world anymore. It exists in the space between life and death, the place where he keeps us. You'll need something to bridge that gap, something that belongs to both worlds." Tommy looked at the wind-up horse, understanding dawning on him. The horse. "It exists in both worlds because it was yours when you disappeared." "Yes, but you'll need more than that. You'll need one of us to guide you, and that means—" Michael's voice broke. "That means someone will have to sacrifice their chance at peace to help you find the grove." The darkness outside pressed against the kitchen window, and Tommy could hear a sound like whispered laughter carried on the wind. The shadow children huddled closer together, their forms becoming more translucent as the entity's presence grew stronger. "Choose quickly," the boy in knickers said. "He can't enter without an invitation, but he'll find a way eventually. And when he does, he'll make you watch as he adds your grandmother to his collection before taking you." Tommy's mind raced. He had to make a decision that would determine not only his fate and his grandmother's, but potentially the fate of every child who might encounter the hungry shadow in the future. "I'll do it," Tommy said, his voice stronger than he felt. "I'll go to the oak grove and try to break the connection. But first we need to get out of here." Michael's ghostly form solidified further as he stepped forward. "I'll guide you, Tommy. I've been trying to find my way back to that place for over 80 years. This might be my only chance to finally be free, even if it means risking everything." The darkness outside the kitchen window pulsed like a living heartbeat, and Tommy could hear something scratching at the glass with what sounded like impossibly long fingernails. The other shadow children began to fade As Michael drew energy from the wind-up horse, their forms becoming translucent whispers in the air. "We'll distract him," the girl with pigtails said, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "But we can't hold him for long. You have maybe an hour before he breaks through our defenses and comes looking for you." Suddenly, the scratching at the window stopped. The oppressive darkness outside began to recede, moving away from the house and deeper into the neighborhood. The shadow children were following through on their promise, leading the hungry shadow away from Tommy and his grandmother. The kitchen returned to normal temperature, and the frost on the windows began to melt. Tommy grabbed the wind-up horse from the table, feeling its metal surface grow warm in his hands. Michael's form flickered but remained visible. "Grandma, we need to get to Griffith Park right now," Tommy said, helping Rose to her feet. Her face was pale but determined. "I'm driving," she said firmly. "If this thing has been haunting our family for over 80 years, then I'm going to be there when we finally put an end to it." They rushed to Rose's old sedan, parked in the driveway. As Tommy climbed into the passenger seat with the wind-up horse clutched tightly in his hands, Michael's ghostly form appeared in the back seat. "Head toward the observatory," Michael instructed as Rose started the engine. "But we're not going to the building itself. The grove is hidden in a fold of reality near the original Tongva sacred site. You'll know we're getting close when the world starts to feel wrong." The drive through Los Angeles traffic felt surreal. Tommy watched normal people going about their Saturday morning routines, jogging, walking dogs, heading to coffee shops, completely unaware that a supernatural entity was hunting children just miles away. The wind-up horse in his lap remained still, but he could feel a faint vibration through the metal like a heartbeat. "Tell me about this grove," Tommy said as they turned onto Los Feliz Boulevard. "How will we know when we've found the right place?" Michael's reflection in the rearview mirror looked troubled. The original oak grove was where the Tongva performed ceremonies to keep dangerous spirits at bay. When white settlers arrived and began developing the land, they unknowingly weakened those protections. The hungry shadow was one of the first entities to break through. As they entered Griffith Park and began winding up the mountain roads toward the observatory, Tommy noticed that the landscape around them seemed to shift subtly. Trees appeared older and more gnarled than they should be. Shadows fell at impossible angles despite the bright morning sun, and there was a quality to the air that made breathing feel labored. "We're getting close," Michael whispered, his form becoming more agitated. "Can you feel it? The way reality is starting to bend." Tommy could feel it. The normal sounds of the city seemed muffled, replaced by an underlying whisper that might have been wind through leaves or might have been something else entirely. The wind-up horse began to vibrate more strongly, its metal surface growing uncomfortably warm. "There," Michael pointed toward a stand of ancient oak trees that Tommy was certain hadn't been visible moments before. "That's where it began. That's where he keeps us." Rose pulled the car over at a scenic overlook, and they sat for a moment staring at the grove of trees that seemed to exist in their own pocket of twisted space. The shadows beneath the oaks were too dark, too deep, and Tommy thought he could see movement within them, the suggestion of children playing in endless mechanical circles. "Once we go in there, there's no guarantee we'll come back out," Michael warned. "The hungry shadow will know immediately that we've entered his domain. And if we fail to break the connection, then we become part of his collection," Tommy finished. He looked at his grandmother, seeing his own fear reflected in her eyes, but also a steely determination that reminded him why he loved her so much. "Let's go end this," Rose said, opening her car door. "That monster has terrorized our family long enough." As they walked toward the impossible grove of oak trees, Tommy felt the wind-up horse pulse with energy, and he knew that whatever happened next would determine the fate of every missing child trapped in the space between worlds. The moment Tommy, Rose, and Michael's ghost crossed the threshold into the oak grove, the world around them changed completely. The bright Los Angeles morning vanished, replaced by a perpetual twilight that seemed to exist outside of normal time. The sky above was a sickly yellow-green color, and the air tasted of copper and decay. The oak trees were massive here, their trunks twisted into impossible spirals that hurt to look at directly. Their branches reached toward the diseased sky like gnarled fingers, and Spanish moss hung from them in thick curtains that swayed without any wind. The ground beneath their feet was spongy and gave way slightly with each step, as if they were walking on something that had once been alive. "Welcome to his domain," Michael whispered, his ghostly form now completely solid in this place between worlds. "This is where he brings all of his victims. Time doesn't work the same way here. Some of us have been playing in these clearings for decades, but to us it feels like we just arrived yesterday." Tommy clutched the wind-up horse tighter as they made their way deeper into the grove. The toy was vibrating so intensely now that it was difficult to hold, and he could hear its melody playing faintly, as if the music was coming from somewhere far ahead of them. "Where are all the children?" Rose asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The unnatural silence of this place made even quiet sounds seem to echo ominously. As if summoned by her question, they began to appear. First, just one or two, then dozens of ghostly children emerged from behind the twisted oak trees. They moved in that same jerky, marionette-like fashion Tommy had seen in his grandmother's kitchen. But here in the shadow realm, their forms were more solid, more real. Their eyes were still empty, but Tommy could see traces of their original personalities fighting against whatever force controlled them. The children formed a wide circle around Tommy, Rose, and Michael, but they didn't approach. Instead, they began to play, jumping rope with chains made of shadow, rolling hoops that left trails of cold fire, playing tag in slow motion. It was a grotesque parody of childhood joy, and Tommy realized this was what Michael had meant when he described the eternal games. "They can't help themselves," Michael explained, his voice filled with anguish. "The hungry shadow forces them to play these games to attract new victims. Children who wander into his domain see other kids having fun and want to join in. By the time they realize something's wrong, it's too late." A sound like thunder rolled through the grove, but instead of coming from above, it seemed to emanate from the ground itself. The playing children stopped their games and turned to stare at something behind Tommy and his grandmother. When Tommy turned around, his blood turned to ice. The hungry shadow stood at the edge of the clearing, and seeing it in its full form was far worse than Tommy had imagined. It was tall, impossibly tall, stretching up toward the sickly sky like a living tower of darkness. Its body seemed to be made of writhing shadows that constantly shifted and reformed, sometimes suggesting the shape of a man in an old-fashioned suit, sometimes becoming pure darkness with no form at all. But it was the face that was truly terrifying. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth, blank surface that reflected the viewer's own face back at them, but wrong somehow, distorted and filled with malevolent hunger. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once, echoing off the twisted trees and seeming to vibrate through the very ground. "So," the entity said, its words like ice scraping against glass, "someone finally comes to challenge me directly. How delightfully refreshing. It's been decades since anyone has been brave enough to enter my domain willingly." The wind-up horse in Tommy's hands began playing its melody loudly now, the sound cutting through the oppressive atmosphere of the shadow realm like a beacon. The hungry shadow's blank face turned toward the toy, and Tommy could feel its attention like a physical weight pressing down on him. "Ah, little Michael's anchor to the living world. I've been wondering when that would resurface. You know, Tommy Ashford, that toy is the only reason your dear great-great-uncle has maintained any semblance of his original self all these years. Without it, he would have become just another of my puppets long ago." Michael stepped protectively in front of Tommy and Rose, his ghostly form blazing with renewed determination. "It's over," he said, his child's voice carrying surprising authority. "We know what you are. We know how you've been feeding on the pain of families for over a century, and we're going to stop you." The hungry shadow's laugh was like the sound of children crying in reverse. "Stop me? Oh, my dear, sweet, naive little ghost. You cannot stop what you do not understand. I am not some simple monster to be defeated with courage and good intentions. I am hunger itself. I am the darkness that lives in every parent's nightmare, the terror that lurks in every shadow where a child might play alone." The entity began to move closer, and Tommy noticed that with each step it took, the trapped children around them became more agitated, their mechanical games becoming frantic and desperate. He realized that the shadow was drawing power from their fear and despair, using their eternal suffering to fuel its own strength. "But I'll make you a deal," the hungry shadow continued, its featureless face somehow managing to convey a horrible smile. "Give me the old woman, and I'll let you leave with the boy. She's lived a full life, hasn't she? Surely one grandmother is worth saving a child." Tommy felt Rose's hand grip his shoulder firmly. "Don't you dare consider it for even a second," she whispered fiercely. "We came here to end this, and that's exactly what we're going to do." "Never," Tommy said, his voice stronger than he felt as he stepped forward to stand beside Michael. "We're not making any deals with you. We're here to free these children and destroy whatever anchor keeps you bound to this place." The hungry shadow's form rippled with what might have been amusement. "Destroy my anchor? Oh, precious child, you understand so little. My anchor isn't some object that can be broken or buried. My anchor is pain itself, the endless grief of families who never found their missing children, the fear that keeps parents awake at night, the despair that feeds me with every anniversary that passes unmarked. The wind-up horse in Tommy's hands suddenly grew burning hot and he nearly dropped it. But as the metal seared his palms, something extraordinary happened. The toy's melody began to change, becoming more complex, more beautiful, and as it played, the trapped children around them started to slow their frantic games. "But there's something else," Tommy said, the realization hitting him like lightning. "You need the children to keep hunting. Without them as bait, you can't lure new victims. That's why you keep them in this in-between state instead of just consuming them completely." Michael's ghostly form blazed brighter as understanding dawned on his face. "The children aren't just your food source, they're your hunting tools. And if they remember who they really are, if they remember their families and their love, they break free from your control," Rose finished, her voice filled with sudden hope. The hungry shadow's form began to writhe more violently, and the diseased sky above them darkened further. "Enough of this foolishness. You think love can overcome centuries of hunger? You think the bonds of family can break chains forged from pure despair?" The entity raised what might have been arms, and shadow tendrils shot out toward Tommy and his grandmother. But Michael threw himself between them and the attack, his ghostly form absorbing the darkness. Where the shadows touched him, his spirit began to unravel, but he held firm. "Now, Tommy!" Michael shouted. "The horse! Use it to remind them who they are!" Tommy raised the wind-up horse above his head, and its melody grew even louder, filling the shadow realm with music that seemed to cut through the oppressive atmosphere like sunlight through fog. One by one, the trapped children began to stop their games and look toward the sound. The little girl with pigtails was the first to remember. Her empty eyes suddenly filled with tears, and she spoke in her own voice for the first time in decades. "Mama? I want to go home to Mama." "Sarah Jenkins," Rose whispered, recognizing the name from their research. "She disappeared in 1963. As Sarah remembered her identity, her ghostly form began to glow with a soft, warm light that pushed back the shadows around her. The boy in knickers was next, then the teenager in bell-bottoms, then more and more of the children as the wind-up horse's melody awakened their buried memories. "No!" the hungry shadow roared, its form becoming more solid and terrifying as it fought to maintain control. "They are mine. Their despair feeds me. Their fear sustains me. I will not let them go." But the children were remembering love now, the love of parents who never stopped looking for them, siblings who kept their rooms exactly as they'd left them, grandparents who lit candles every year on the anniversary of their disappearance. And that love was more powerful than the entity's hunger. One by one, the children began to break free from their eternal games. They moved toward Tommy and the wind-up horse, and as they did, their ghostly forms grew brighter and more solid. The girl in the frozen t-shirt reached out and touched the toy, adding her own energy to its melody. "I remember now," she said in wonder. "My mum makes the best pancakes on Sunday mornings. She promised to teach me her secret recipe when I got older." The hungry shadow began to shriek, a sound like breaking glass and dying birds that made the twisted oak trees shake and drop their diseased leaves. As more children remembered their lives and their families, the entity's form started to become less solid, more translucent. "Their memories are your weakness," Tommy realized. "Love is your weakness. You can't feed on pain and despair when it's overwhelmed by love and hope." Michael, his form now badly damaged from absorbing the shadow's attack, managed to smile. "Tommy, there's one more thing you need to do. The grove itself, this twisted version of the sacred space, it needs to be cleansed, but it will require a sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Tommy asked, though he was beginning to understand what Michael meant. "Someone needs to stay behind to anchor the cleansing process. Someone needs to hold the door open long enough for all the children to cross over to whatever comes next." Michael's ghostly form flickered weakly. "I've been lost between worlds for 84 years, Tommy. Let me finally do something that matters." Around them, the shadow realm was beginning to crack and splinter as more children broke free from the hungry shadow's control. Beams of golden light were breaking through the diseased sky, and Tommy could hear something beautiful in the distance. The sound of families calling their lost children's names with voices full of love and forgiveness. "No, Michael," Tommy said firmly, clutching the wind-up horse as it continued to play its transformative melody. "There has to be another way. You've suffered enough. You all have. I won't let you sacrifice yourself again." The hungry shadow, its form now wavering and unstable as more children broke free from its control, let out a roar of fury that shook the very foundations of the shadow realm. "You cannot save them all, boy. Even if you free these few, I will simply move on, find new hunting grounds, collect new children. I am eternal, I am hunger itself. But Tommy was no longer listening to the entity's threats. He was watching the freed children as they gathered around him and his grandmother, their ghostly forms growing brighter and more solid with each passing moment. Sarah Jenkins, the little girl with pigtails, reached out and touched Rose's hand. "You're Michael's sister," Sarah said with wonder. "I can see the family resemblance. He talks about you all the time, about how much he misses you and Robert." Rose's eyes filled with tears as she knelt down to Sarah's level. "He's been trapped here all this time, hasn't he? Trying to find his way home." "We all have," the boy in knickers said, his voice now clear and strong instead of the hollow whisper it had been. But Michael was different. He never forgot who he was, never let the shadow completely take control. The wind-up horse kept him anchored to his memories of love. Tommy looked at the toy in his hands, understanding flooding through him. The horse isn't just Michael's anchor to the living world. It's an anchor to love itself. That's why its melody can break the shadow's control. Michael's damaged form managed to move closer to his great-great-nephew. "Tommy, I need you to understand something. The sacrifice doesn't have to be one of us staying behind. The real sacrifice is letting go of the pain, the anger, the desire for revenge against this creature. The shadow feeds on negative emotions, but it starves when confronted with forgiveness and release." The entity seemed to sense where this was leading, and its attacks became more desperate. Shadow tendrils lashed out in all directions, trying to reclaim the children who had broken free, but the growing light emanating from their remembered love pushed the darkness back. "You want to destroy my anchor?" the hungry shadow snarled. "My anchor is every parent who dies without knowing what happened to their child, every sibling who spends their life wondering if they could have prevented the tragedy, every family torn apart by unanswered questions. Then we give them answers," Tommy said suddenly, his voice filled with newfound determination. "We give them closure. We let them know their children are safe now, that they're finally free to move on." He raised the wind-up horse higher, and its melody grew to encompass not just the shadow realm, but somehow reached beyond, touching the living world, where families still grieved for their lost children. Tommy could feel the connections forming, invisible threads of love and closure reaching across time and space to touch the hearts of everyone who had ever lost a child to the hungry shadow. The freed children began to glow even brighter, and Tommy realized they were preparing to move on to whatever came after death. But before they left, each one turned to him with gratitude, shining in their no longer empty eyes. "Tell our families we're okay," Sarah said, her form already becoming translucent as she prepared to cross over. "Tell them we love them, and we're not in pain anymore." One by one, the children began to fade away, not into nothingness, but into a warm golden light that felt like coming home. As they departed, the shadow realm around them began to crumble, the twisted oak trees straightening and returning to their natural forms, the diseased sky clearing to reveal normal blue heavens. The hungry shadow's form was disintegrating as its source of power, the trapped children and the pain of their families, was being systematically destroyed by love and closure. "This isn't possible," it wailed, its voice becoming weaker with each passing moment. "I am eternal. I cannot be destroyed by sentiment and foolish hope." "You're not being destroyed," Michael said, his own form beginning to glow as he prepared to join the other children in crossing over. "You're being starved. Without pain to feed on, without children to use as bait, without families torn apart by unanswered questions, you're just an empty hunger with nothing to sustain it." Tommy felt the wind-up horse growing lighter in his hands, its melody reaching a crescendo that seemed to fill the entire universe with harmony. The last of the shadow realm's twisted landscape melted away, replaced by the normal, beautiful oak grove that had existed before the entity's corruption. The hungry shadow made one final attempt to attack, lunging toward Tommy with the last of its strength. But Michael stepped forward, his spirit blazing with the power of 84 years of love from his family, and caught the entity's attack. Instead of being destroyed by it, Michael's love transformed the darkness, turning the shadow's hunger into something else entirely, a lost spirit that had forgotten its own origins, finally remembering what it had been before centuries of feeding. Pain had twisted it into a monster. For just a moment, Tommy saw the hungry shadow as it truly was, not an ancient evil, but a creature that had once been something else, something that had lost its way and become corrupted by its own endless appetite. And in that moment of recognition, even this fallen entity found redemption, dissolving into particles of light that scattered on the wind like seeds of hope. Tommy and Rose found themselves standing in the normal oak grove in Griffith Park, the afternoon sun filtering through healthy green leaves and casting dappled shadows on the ground that looked completely natural for the first time in over a century. The wind-up horse in Tommy's hands had stopped playing its melody and was now simply a beautifully crafted antique toy, warm but no longer burning hot with supernatural energy. The transformation of the grove was remarkable. Where twisted, diseased trees had reached toward a sickly sky just moments before, now stood majestic oaks with thick, healthy trunks and branches that provided perfect shade for families and children. The ground beneath their feet was soft with fallen leaves and wildflowers that had somehow bloomed in the space of minutes, as if nature itself was celebrating the end of the shadow's reign. Michael's spirit stood before them one last time, his ghostly form more solid and peaceful than Tommy had ever seen it. The 5-year-old boy looked exactly as he had in 1939, with his dark hair neatly combed and his simple clothes from that era, but his eyes now held the wisdom and peace of someone who had spent decades helping others find their way home. "Is it really over?" Rose asked, her voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. She looked around the grove with amazement, hardly able to believe that the nightmare realm they had just escaped could have been transformed into this peaceful sanctuary. "It's over," Michael confirmed, his child's voice now free of the sadness and desperation that had haunted it for so long. "The shadow is gone forever, and all the children are free. They've crossed over to where they were always meant to go. Sarah, Timothy, all of them. They're finally at peace." Tommy looked around the peaceful grove, finding it hard to believe that just moments before, this place had been a twisted realm of nightmares where dozens of children had been trapped for decades. The air smelled of oak leaves and wildflowers instead of decay and copper. Birds were singing in the branches above them, and he could hear the distant sounds of normal park activities, families having picnics, children playing on swings, dogs barking happily as they chased frisbees. "What about you, Michael? Why are you still here?" Tommy asked, noticing that while his great-great-uncle's spirit looked peaceful, he hadn't yet faded away like the other children. Michael smiled, the first truly happy expression Tommy had seen from his great-great-uncle's spirit. "I wanted to say goodbye properly this time. I never got the chance when I disappeared in 1939. I never got to tell Rose and Robert how much I loved them. Never got to hug my parents one last time. I've been waiting 84 years for this moment." Rose knelt down to Michael's level, tears streaming down her face as she looked into the eyes of the brother she had lost as a child. "We never stopped loving you, Michael. Even after all these years, even after everyone else said we should accept that you were gone and move on, I never stopped hoping you'd find your way home. Mum kept your room exactly the same until the day she died. Dad used to walk through Griffith Park every weekend for 20 years calling your name." "I know," Michael said gently, his translucent hand reaching out to touch Rose's cheek. And amazingly, she could feel the contact like a cool breeze against her skin. "I could feel that love all these years, even when I was trapped in the Shadow's realm. It's what kept me from becoming completely lost like the other children initially were. Your love and Robert's love and Mum and Dad's love, it was my anchor to humanity. It gave me the strength to help the others remember who they were when the time finally came." Tommy felt a profound sense of completion as he watched his grandmother and her long-lost brother share this final moment together. But he also sensed that Michael's time in the world of the living was coming to an end. The golden light that had begun to emanate from the boy's spirit was growing brighter, and Tommy could almost see a doorway opening behind him, leading to someplace warm and welcoming. "There's something else you need to know," Michael said, turning to Tommy with an expression of deep gratitude. "The families of all the children who were taken over the years, they're going to start having dreams tonight. Good dreams. Peaceful dreams where their lost children visit them to say goodbye and let them know they're safe. The closure you helped create will reach everyone who needs it, spanning decades of grief and unanswered questions." As if to confirm Michael's words, Tommy felt the wind-up horse pulse gently in his hands one last time before going completely still. When he looked down at it, he saw that the painted details had become even more vivid and beautiful, as if the toy had been restored to its original 1939 condition. The little horse's blue and gold paint gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and its carved mane looked as delicate and precise as the day it was made. "Keep it," Michael said, noticing Tommy's gaze. "It's not a supernatural anchor anymore, just a beautiful antique toy. But it's a reminder of what love can accomplish, even in the darkest circumstances. Whenever you wind it up and hear its melody, remember that hope and courage can overcome any shadow. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. From their vantage point in the grove, Tommy could see the city stretching out below them, looking somehow brighter and more alive than it had that morning. Michael's form started to become translucent again, but this time it was different. He was fading into golden light rather than shadow, moving toward peace rather than being trapped in limbo. "Will we see you again?" Rose asked, her voice breaking slightly, as she realized their reunion was coming to an end. "Someday," Michael promised, his voice growing fainter but filled with joy. "When it's your time to cross over, I'll be there waiting for you. And Robert, too. He passed 3 years ago, and he's been helping me watch over the family ever since. And Tommy, thank you for being brave enough to see me, to listen to me, and to help me save all those lost children. You're going to grow up to do amazing things, and our family will always be proud of you." With those final words, Michael's spirit began to dissolve into countless golden particles of light that danced on the evening breeze like fireflies before disappearing entirely into the approaching sunset. Tommy and Rose stood in the peaceful grove for several more minutes, holding hands and watching the sun set over Los Angeles, both feeling a sense of completion and peace they had never experienced before. As they walked back to Rose's car, Tommy noticed that the entire city looked different somehow, brighter, more alive, as if a shadow that had been hanging over it for decades had finally been lifted. Children in the park were laughing more freely, parents seemed more relaxed, and even the evening air felt cleaner and more refreshing. They drove home through the winding roads of Griffith Park and down into Silver Lake in comfortable silence, both processing the extraordinary events of the day and knowing that their lives had been forever changed by their encounter with the supernatural. That night, as Tommy lay in bed at his grandmother's house, he could hear Rose on the phone in the kitchen, calling his parents to let them know he was safe and would be staying one more night. She didn't mention the supernatural events, of course. That would be their secret, a bond between them that would last for the rest of their lives. Tommy placed the wind-up horse on the nightstand beside his bed and carefully wound the small key on its side. The toy began to play its gentle melody, but now the song sounded completely different, not haunting or desperate, but peaceful and filled with hope and love. As he drifted off to sleep, Tommy thought he could hear the distant sound of children playing happily in some faraway place where shadows held no terror and love conquered every fear. In the weeks and months that followed, reports began to surface from across the country of families experiencing vivid, comforting dreams about their missing children. Police departments noted an unusual number of cold cases being officially closed as families found the peace and closure they needed to move forward with their lives. And in Griffith Park, visitors began to comment on how beautiful and serene the oak groves had become, describing them as perfect places for families to picnic and children to play safely in the afternoon sun. The hungry shadow was gone forever, its century-long reign of terror ended by the power of love, memory, and one 8-year-old boy's courage to face the darkness and bring lost children home to the light.